This video is going to be demonstrating how to ease tight flanges. In piano actions, there's a number of different flanges in an action, and if they get too tight, or they could be possibly too loose, the work has to be done to get them to the right tension or the right tightness, or the action won't work properly. I'm going to be demonstrating on grand hammer flanges today, but the same procedure would apply to any of the different types of flanges that you run across in a piano action, whether it's grand or upright. So now here we're going to show you a couple different demonstrations. This one here is showing a very loose flange, and we're going to show you how to fix that. And then over here we've got one that's overly tight. Now when we measure it, there's a number of different ways, but the most accurate way is to use a gram gauge, gram tension gauge is what this is. At least on the grand hammer flanges and on a lot of the flanges that you're going to come across, you want the measurement to be generally between 1 and 4 grams of tension. And that'll vary between seasons. In the summertime it'll generally be a little bit tighter, in the winter it'll be a little bit looser. But if we go to this one, if we measure it, and what you want to do is you want to kind of hold it sideways so you don't have the gravity working for or against you. So when I measure this one, it doesn't even measure 1 gram. It barely goes above 0, so we can tell that one's way too loose. Now with grand hammer flanges, you can do a basic test too, is what's called the swing test, just to get a general idea if it's like way too loose or way too tight. If we did the swing test, which we hold it up like this and swing it, if it just keeps swinging for quite a while, that means that's another sign that it's going to be too loose. But we could tell from the gram tension gauge that that it is too loose. So what we're going to have to do here is put in a bigger pin. So here I've got my center pin extracting tool, and I'm going to take the pin out. And you want to be careful that you don't push the bushing out at the same time, because then you're going to have to rebush the hole. But now I'm going to take your micrometer and figure out what size center pin was in there that was too loose, so you can go up a size from there. Okay, we can see that this one is 50 thousandths. Okay, so 0.050 inches. That's 50 thousandths of an inch, which that would equate to size 20 in the center pins. Okay, to figure out the calculation between the diameter and the size of center pin, you take the diameter, divide it in half, and subtract 10. So 50 divided by 2, or I'm sorry, subtract 10 from the diameter and then divide it in half. So 50 minus 10 would be 40, divide that in half would make 20, so you're going to be size 20. So we're going to go up to a size 20 and a half. Okay, and we're going to check it. Now what we want to do first is make sure that it's going to be tight in the non-bushed part. Okay, and if you try to push it in and it doesn't, and you can't push it in by hand, that means it's tight enough. Okay, so we're going to check, and I'm just going to check it without putting it together to see how tight this is. And that's fairly tight. So we're probably going to have to do some reaming, but if we go down to the lower size back to 20, we know that was too loose. So we're going to ream it to get it to the correct tightness. Now here I've got my flange bushing broaches. They've got different broach for each size, and I'm going to start with the 50, even though that's one size lower than what we do. It's good because we don't want to overdo it, but I'm just going to go through, and what you do is you put it in the hole, run it through, because there's a roughened spot right in here that kind of tears the felt a little bit, and then the rest of it will smooth it and So we'll try that and we'll see what if that made any difference. It's still pretty tight, which I thought it would be. Okay, so then we'll go up to the next size, which is the 51 thousandths. Okay, and doing it a couple times. You don't want to do it too much because, again, you can't make the bushing tighter. You can only make it looser. So, okay, now that still feels a little tight, but I'm going to put the part together and test it with my gauge to see where we're at with it. Because if it's still a little tight, we can still ream it a little bit, but okay, now first check the swing test. Okay, it's probably a little on the tight side, but I'm going to check it here. And we're showing at about 4 grams. So that's kind of on the top side of thing, or of tightness. So that could be acceptable. But being winter here, that we probably don't want it that tight. So I'd go back and ream it a little bit more, and then once you get the right tightness, then you can cut the center pin off with the center pin nippers. Okay, so that's taking care of the tight flange. Now taking care of the loose flange and get it to that. Now, like I said, I would probably go through and make that just a little bit looser with my flange bushing broaches. But now we're going to address this one that's just too tight. Okay, if we look at the drops or the swing test, it drops and it doesn't swing at all. Okay, and if I measure this with my gram tension gauge, I can see that this goes all the way up to 8 grams, which is obviously much higher than it should be. So I'm going to take this center pin out and see, again, measure it with my micrometer, see what size we're working with here. Okay, and that's 51 thousandths. So that's one size higher than what we had in the last one. Okay, so now we don't necessarily want to go with a smaller pin, so I'm going to take the same size pin, which is size 20.5 for 51 thousandths, but I'm going to ream this hole a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to take my 51 thousandths broach, do it a couple times, okay, and then test it. Again, that feels pretty tight still, so I'm going to do it a little bit more. You get a feel for it as you've done it, as you do it a few times. Again, you don't want to overdo it. Okay, let's see what kind of a difference that made. We'll put the parts back together. And the center pin extracting tool, and on one end it has the pin for taking out the old pin, and the other side has a flat end for pushing in the new pin. So it's double duty. So now let's take just the initial swing test. And it's still pretty tight. Okay, let's see if it made any difference on our gram gauge. Well, there we're at about 6, so it did make some difference, but we're going to go through, take the pin out. I haven't cut it off yet, so I can reuse that still. But I'm going to take my 51. Now, sometimes you'll ream it with the same size reamer, and it still be a little bit tight. So I'm going to go several times on this because this was pretty tight. You may get to where, if you can't get it to be loose enough with the same size reamer, you go down to the next size reamer. So I might go to a 52 because that still feels pretty tight. So I'm going to try it. Just use the 52. Okay, that feels pretty tight, so I don't want to do too much, but I'll go twice on it. And check. Okay, now that's feeling better. Still on the tight side, probably. The other thing is you can do is swing that back and forth. That sometimes loosens it up a little bit too. Okay, now that's we get 3 swings out of that, so that's pretty good. I'm going to check with my tension gauge. Oh, that's really nice. That's 3 grams of tension, which is between 2 and 3. So that's that's a good amount. So that's a good, with the swing test. Generally, you want 3 to 5 swings. Again, it'll vary depending on how large of a hammer you use. If you've got a bigger hammer, it's going to probably swing more than if you've got one of the high treble hammers. It won't swing as much because there's not as much weight there. So, but again, the gram tension gauge is the best way to measure that. So that's the procedure for repinning flanges, and you want to get it again tight in the non-bushed part, but just the right amount of friction and tightness on the bushed part.